Without further ado, I'm just going to quickly introduce the speaker, Prasad. He's a researcher and writer from the United States. As of now, he's currently Washington, D.C. based. He's been engaged with various think tanks like USIP, Stimson Center, and most recently Hudson. Right now, he's with Critica Research, and he's just come from doing a conference about this topic of the jihadist reaction to Hindutva. It's basically about how one group of extremists basically give fodder to another. And we don't just mean extremists, the domestic extremists, but transnational ones, ones with networks all over the world, like Qaeda, ISIS. And so without further ado, I think I'll hand it over to Hadi.
Hi, hey everybody, my name is Prasad. Like Dan has said, I'm from Washington, D.C., and this is also my first time to Hyderabad, so I'm really loving it. And the biryani is great. I can't have biryani in America anymore, so that's kind of sad. But so I did this is like a paper based on a paper I published with a journal called Current Trends in Islamist Ideology. And it's like the first part of a larger project about how these different extremisms, how they talk about each other, how they view each other. And I'll get into why it's important, but especially in today's world where something that happens here is viewed by around the world, and while it might be viewed by a lot of good people, there's other people who want to take advantage of it for their own agenda and own purposes. So with that, let me go to the next slide. So first things first, because especially in today's environment and stuff like that, some of these terms are very politically charged. So forgive me if I'm going to be a little bit of an academic for a sec, but let's define our terms. Does anyone know who this is? Who these people are? What? Sorry, what did you say? Okay. Does anyone know who this is? Okay. Does anyone know who the person on the top there is? Yeah, Hafiz Saeed. So, the reason why I bring this up, so this is actually an Islamist party in Tunisia. They're called the Ennahda party. So they're Islamists and they bring Islam into politics. But they're also one of the groups that's responsible for bringing democracy to Tunisia and for overthrowing the dictator Ben Ali in Tunisia in 2010, 2011. So that's like, often when we talk about the terms Islamicism, we have like a very set image in our head, but in reality, Islamicism is a very wide spectrum. So most Islamist parties, whether it be Ennahda, the Muslim Brotherhood, or even JI in India, are very big participants in the democratic process. They just simply bring their own Islamic values into it, which, if you're secular, you maybe have some disagreement, but it's a very different thing. There's a very different thing, and like there's different spectrums of Islamicism, as my paper's about. So this is Jamaluddin Afghani. He's actually, some people say he's Persian, some people say he's Afghan. I don't say because I know my Afghan friends get really angry if I say he's Persian, but he's like a really big anti-colonial person during the 18th century, sorry. And so he's actually was one of the early people of what we call the Salafi movement. And the word Salaf in Arabic means ancestors. There's people within Islamic theology who believe that, well, during this period, we got too far from the source material, so we need to go back to the basics. We need to have our own independent reasoning. And Jamaluddin Afghani was one of the people who discussed, like, we need to go back, we need to approach Islam in a different way. And again, it's a very different thing. There's like people like Ibn Taymiyyah who tend to be extremists, who are also Salafis, people from like Madkhali, but there's like the Salafi movement itself are like people who are just simply, who their main goal essentially is their relationship with God. Then we get to Salafi-Jihadism, where Hafiz Saeed is a representation of that. So these are the people like object, so unlike mainstream Islamist parties, they object to democracy, they object to other interpretations of Islam, they object to, and they're much more authoritarian, so they want to overthrow the whole system in a way. So in this case, they use violence to achieve their goals. If you want me, I can also recommend some good sources on the differences, because like this nuance is kind of lost, because again, in many parts of the world, it was like in the Middle East, Islamists were the ones who were asking for democracy and helped bring democracy to the world. So although I'm talking about Salafi-Jihadists, I'm specifically talking about ISIS and the groups associated with Al-Qaeda. So this is where we get into their view of how they view things happening in India. So this is a copy from like ISIS's English language magazine, and they have this idea of called the gray zone. So in this idea, they were talking about Muslims in the West because it's an English language magazine, and they point out, you know what, there is Islamophobia in the West, and like this Islamophobia by far right people, white supremacists, harms Muslims, our job as ISIS is to make this problem of Islamophobia worse, is to help feed into it. Because as it is, they view any Muslims living in a non-Muslim society as part of like their extremist vision. They view any Muslim living with non-Muslims peacefully as apostates, as kuffar. And they said, like, okay, well, we're going to give them a choice. We're going to conduct terrorist attacks in the West. So like they conducted terrorist attacks in France and elsewhere. And this was for the purpose of empowering the far right, in the hope that the far right will then attack the Muslims in France, UK, wherever. And the hope by ISIS is that either the Muslims in these societies have a choice. They can either join us or they can forever leave their religion. So our job is like, we want to empower these people because they're the people who are helpful for our vision and they think like us. So even if you were following ISIS chatter during the 2016 presidential election, most people in ISIS actually wanted President Trump to win because they go, if he wins, we want him to be Islamophobic, we want him to harass the Muslims because that's good for us. So that's like their concept of the gray zone. And while this magazine article was specific to the West, the strategy has been utilized by Al-Qaeda. So in Iraq, their main thing was to like instigate Shia fighters to attack Sunnis to help cause sectarian conflict. And in the case of India, they're talking about the relations between Hindus and Muslims. Next slide. So I'm hoping most of you guys are familiar with Hindutva. And so I won't spend too much time, but this is like the alternative vision that they're fighting against. And I guess similar to like a lot of the post-colonial debates in the Middle East and stuff like that, it comes from like Hindutva comes from a period of colonization when like different populations were figuring out like, why did we get colonized? Why did we get conquered? And within like the Hindu community, there was like different thoughts of like, we need to move forward with our religion or that we stray too far from our religion too. And I'm just simplifying a little bit for sake. And Hindutva kind of emerged from like the latter of like we stray too far from our faith. We need to restore our Hindu pride. And specifically Savarkar is important because he didn't envision Hindus as a religious people. He envisioned them as a race that are native to India or South Asia as a whole. But in this paradigm that he creates, Muslims and Christians are inherently foreigners in this land because in his mind, you're a true Indian, true Hindu because your holy lands are here in South Asia, but Christians and Muslims, their holy lands in the Middle East, so they can never be, in his mind, truly loyal. But as a result, like again, Hindutva itself is a very varied movement. And I'm focusing on the more extreme aspects, but this already, as you can see, sets up a mindset of like how do you view the other. So if you're a Hindutva member, maybe at best you view Muslims and Christians as second-class citizens. At worst, like we have people like other RSS figures who want Muslims and Christians to be eliminated. And this is where the extremism comes in. Next slide. So when Modi took power in 2014, this coincided with two other events. Sorry, I keep on dropping this. I like to talk with my hands a lot. So when Modi took power in 2014, two other things happened that year. So the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria declared a caliphate after the conquering of parts of Iraq. But also in the same year, Al-Qaeda declared its branch in South Asia. So then like shortly afterwards, after Al-Qaeda declared a branch for South Asia, ISIS followed suit. So that's actually another Hafiz Saeed. Not the same Hafiz Saeed, obviously, and the difference between the two is this one's dead. And so he also declared it, and there's a lot of discussion because like these groups declared their lead in 2014, right after like around the same time Modi took power, but Al-Qaeda and ISIS both really struggled to actually attract members. So like that right there is the first group of Indians who allegedly declared allegiance to ISIS in 2014. And they're actually a break off the Indian Mujahideen. Before this, no one had ever heard of them. And I don't think anyone's really ever heard of them again. And they essentially made a quick video, possibly went off somewhere, but it was like nothing, and they really struggled. But it started to change when dynamics in other parts of the world started changing. So like the way ISIS was able to come into Pakistan or Afghanistan, they started making local allegiances with groups. So a lot of the sectarian groups in Pakistan aligned with ISIS, and that allowed ISIS to spread their stuff into Pakistan. And similarly in Bangladesh, a lot of the groups that are already present worked with ISIS to like say, you know what, we'll do this in the name of ISIS and you can use our fighters. Similarly, so for anyone who doesn't recognize this is Zakir Musa. He was of the Hizbul Mujahideen until he pretty much insulted everybody, went completely off the rails, and the Hizbul Mujahideen expelled him. He formed a group called Ansar Ghazwatul Hind, which maintained links to Al-Qaeda. He's also dead, so I mean, so far people on this page are not doing well. But yeah, so like understanding like that these groups and these events happened in the same year Modi happened is going to play a really important role, because now that they're trying to localize the fight, because they know like what happens in Iraq is not going to, it can't be talked about here. So this is where the narrative comes in. Next slide. So so one of the Al-Qaeda linked groups ran a video series called Saffron Terror, and as we know, like especially for a lot of radical Hindutva's who commit violence, a lot of times, you know, they record the things, like as we saw with the guy who killed the Muslim man over love jihad, or a lot of the lynchings, they record it. So for these groups, like the simplest thing is like, oh look, they recorded it, let's just play the recordings. So these are 3 of the 4 videos, and each one of them is like, so this one in here, a Muslim man was just driving around, Hindu's bodies pulled him off his bike and started beating him, claiming he had beef, he was carrying beef. And they let the video play out and like translate all the things for anyone who can't read it, and ended with, what are you doing about this? America's not helping, the government's not helping, the UN's not doing anything. Look what they're doing, they're letting this happen. And similarly, like for this, like there's a Muslim man having his beard pulled by Hindutva's who are very insulted by you, how dare you have a beard? And like, they forced him to chant Jai Shri Ram, Narendra Modi is my daddy, Jai Hind, and all that fun stuff. Well, not fun stuff, but and also similar. So they actually play out the lynchings themselves, because going, this is what they want. They need the narrative of fear to make themselves look better. And the very final bit I didn't put is actually a clip of a bunch of speeches. Some of the speeches are by BJP folks, some of the speeches are by Shiv Sena folks, but it has a very similar theme. It's these people saying like, you know, we don't want those Muslims here. Like when I get into office, we will wipe out all the Muslims, we will make them beg. And they just play out these speeches, and they ended like going, this is what they're doing to you, they're coming for you, what are you going to do about it? And so that's like one of the video series that they had talking about this. Next slide. So of course the Babri Masjid plays a big part of their narrative, because even like when we talk about Indian politics in the West, when the Babri Masjid fell, this was a big turning point in Indian politics for like a lot of observers and political scientists. So unsurprisingly, it's also a big thing. And they point out like, just like look at the injustice of it. Not only did they tear it down, but they went around and rioted everywhere, and nobody did anything. And you ask like, who got punished? What happened? Look at what happened to you. And and also saying, what are you guys doing about this? You Muslims are supposed to be strong, but you're just letting this happen to you. So again, they're trying to say like, you should be afraid. You, like as an Indian Muslim, should be afraid. You are being attacked, you are under siege, you have to do something. And that's when they get to the next slide, I think. The need for jihad. So going, okay, and like this is on the Telegram, this is on the videos and stuff, and this is a very frequent thing. They say like, okay, look at, you have this forces, you have Hindutva forces coming after you, they're lynching you, they're anti-you, they're giving speeches, attacking you. And so you need to defend yourselves. No one else is going to defend you, so we will join us and we will defend you. And they also have like very sophisticated arguments trying to say why, you know, Indian Muslims should join them and do it. And one of the things is like, there's a concept within like conservative Islamic theology of like peace pact between governments and the communities. And for like a lot of Islamic groups in India, there's a peace pact that's valid as long as you let us live and practice. We have no problem. And they would try putting out arguments to counteract these folks, saying like, there is no peace pact, they broke it. But more importantly, as they say, this peace pact between Muslims and the Indian government was never valid because of one thing. And this is where we get into the larger narrative, because while they say like you are being attacked by Hindutvatis, the Hindutvatis are coming to get you, you will be killed, and you have to defend yourself, they have another big issue. Next slide. So for them, for like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, the real problem is not Hindutva, it's democracy. Because they view like, you know, you should not be Democrats. Like for them, like Islam is not democratic. So accepting someone else's sovereignty is un-Islamic, and any Muslim who does this is like is a false Muslim, and you know, kafir and stuff like that. So, and at the end of the day, even with Zawahiri and other people, their narrative isn't that, oh, Hindutva is a problem, and when Hindutva is gone, you can go back. It's like the very problem, that reason why you Indian Muslims are facing this oppression is because of democracy. Because democracy makes you guys make you guys victims, and you need to strike back. You need to strike back, and that's why you need us. And this is again like showing them how they're trying to look at issues happening in India and say, this is our narrative. You should join us because we'll do something about it. But like, while I have presented this thing as like kind of like while they're reacting to this. Next slide. There are like also like many different other things that are being said, because I only presented a small slice of the total things that they're saying on Telegram, what videos they're releasing, and the magazines they're publishing. So this is Abdul Rashid. He's one of the ISIS members from Kerala. He's also dead. So I mean, everybody who's showing up in my PowerPoint's not having the good luck. And so if you can see, like, this is a small part of a WhatsApp message he sent, because for him and a couple of the Malayali members, they use WhatsApp to communicate. And this is like a 10-minute long message that was the 35th message he has sent. And that might seem like a lot, but someone who's on a family WhatsApp group, I get way more messages on the really daily, so it seems like he was kind of slacking a little bit. And as you can see, like, he's kind of is bigoted, because he's calling for violence. Like, you know, just like, because he says in his videos, like, Indian Muslims, you are useless. Why aren't you taking a car and running over the Hindus? Why aren't you attacking the Christians? It's so easy. Why aren't you doing it? And it's going like, well, there's like, they are trying to latch on to like legitimate grievances and like trying to react to the same things like people in India are reacting to, that they are fundamentally just have their own problems, where they, like, at least in this group, there's like difference for all the members, that some of them are bigots and they do want to cause harm and chaos just because they don't know how to deal with it otherwise. Next one. Oh, and also this is from like one of the latest weekly newsletters, and this happened after Kashmir, where they're calling for violence against Hindus and as many other people. But I mean, going to the Gulf, you're not going to be able to do that, because otherwise the Gulf's going to collapse. And I mean, there's so many Malayalis there in the Gulf. So, and so like but the thing is, as time goes on, like, they were new in 2014, but they are doing they are trying to like make their influence known in this. But so I paint like a really dark picture of like their violence and like them highlighting the violence. So if we go to the next slide. Why to be optimistic? So when you talk about extremist groups like ISIS or Al-Qaeda, I think total from India, only 200 people have been arrested or joined the group, from what we can estimate. And that's out of if we're talking about like where they could drop from like the Muslim population, there's 200 million Muslims, only 200 join or were sympathizers. That's an incredibly small percentage. In America, with a population of only 5 million, we had many more people join ISIS from that. And despite that, like, consistently, the Indian Muslim community has consistently said, like, whether it be Darul Diban or different seminaries, has issued out fatwas saying, like, this is why you're wrong, and breaking down that ISIS's so-called theology or Al-Qaeda's so-called theology, and saying this is why you're wrong Islamically, because especially if you guys ever read ISIS's rationale, it doesn't really make sense, but it's just supposed to be propaganda, so it's not supposed to make sense. And then at the same time, like, despite like, you know, like the rise of like extremist Hindutva, there's still like some signs to be positive for. So a recent survey done by Ajay Burgess, who's studying how Hindus view politics, he did a recent survey after the elections in Uttar Pradesh, and when he researched them, like the questions of how do you feel about the Hindu Rashtra, how do you feel about the beef lynchings and this and that, and how do you feel about pluralism, how do you feel about living in a community. And surprisingly or unsurprisingly, most of them said like we're against a Hindu Rashtra. We do not agree with the goals of the song. And we love democracy, we love our pluralism, we love our secularism, and yeah, we like our Muslim neighbors. And even then, like, despite everything that's been happening, despite some like rhetoric from like certain people saying like, oh, the Muslims are doing this and that, there's very little sign that the Muslim population has radicalized, or there's very few incidents of Muslims actually responding with violence, so like they are very dedicated to the process. So there is a very, very strong civil society that acts as a natural barrier to extremism. That said, these groups are going to do whatever they can to make a power, to gain a foothold here and do attacks. So the question is like, not what to do, how to prevent that, but if they do the attacks, how do you respond with more hate, which is what they want, or with something else? And thank you. Also, sorry if I spoke really quickly. I talk really, really, really quickly, so.
We have a lot of time for Q&A session, so the mic will come to you. You can just raise the hand, and if you have any questions, clarifications, comments, please feel free. Hari is here, and he can clarify.
Yeah. Sir, I came in a little bit late. Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah.
Now the question is, are you saying that there is a coincidence between the rise of ISIS and Al-Qaeda with the rise of Hindutva in India?
No,
Or are you saying that there is a rise of Hindutva in India because of the rise of ISIS and Al-Qaeda?
No. So I just use it as a coincidence because like all three happened within months of each other. Like the stuff when ISIS declared a caliphate in Iraq and Syria, it just so happened it came really, really close when Hindutva came in India. But like Hindutva has been around in India for decades now, and like they've been slowly gaining power. And before ISIS even declared a caliphate, like everybody knew like the BJP was going to win the elections. So I just highlight it as a coincidence. Though when Zawahiri declared AQIS, it just so happened like since Modi was in power, it gave him someone to target. But the thing is, like, most evidence shows Zawahiri was trying to set up a South Asian branch much ahead of time. And it so happened, like, before Modi came to power, he would have criticized Manmohan Singh. So I just highlighted it as a thing of, like, here's, like, 3 events that happened that year, which skips a lot of analysts, but it's actually a very interesting thing because while they all had separate causes, they all, like, mingle for my talk.
Thank you for showing us the reality and how things are changing and they are regrouping themselves. My question is, if we trace back the origin of Islamic fundamentalism in terms of Muslim brotherhood, the concept of brotherhood, then it started in Egypt and in 1920s. And then the fall of caliphate in Turkey and the establishment of the imperialist intervention there. So my question is, whenever the rise of reactionary religious fundamentalism has happened, it has always happened with the base of economic crisis and deterioration in economic life and material condition. So it is very much connected to the imperialist intervention and the decline of material wealth in the Egypt. So do you agree with that?
I mostly agree with that because it's not just economic things; it's also like political grievances. Because like also when the Muslim Brotherhood rose up, they were still dealing with colonization, and it wasn't just the economic grievances. They were very upset at the fact they were being ruled by this, and like because like again like I think you bring up the thing of like these different crises. Like when extremist groups happen, they don't just come out of nowhere. There's like a very specific context of when they rise up, and you have to understand the context before you understand before you learn how to beat them, how to counteract their narrative. You have to understand where they're coming from, because some like Sayyid Qutb, who's like the guy who I guess one of the most influential Islamist thinkers, who's influenced everybody from mainstream to extremists. Like his journey of how he became who he is a very complicated journey. How even throughout, if you read his readings from the time he was in America to Egypt, it was like a huge thought process. So, and it's clear for him, so Sayyid Qutb is a very unique, different case in some ways, but there's a thing of economic crisis, but also political crises, and how do we deal with this? So, yeah, I think you're largely on point.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What effect do you think the removal of Article 370 will have on jihadi terrorism?
Yeah, so that's a big thing. So when I did that one thing from the newsletter, that expelled a Hindu from the Arabian Plateau, that was posted in response to Article 370. And even so, when I was monitoring ISIS chats, shortly after that, there's like new groups that were forming like pro-ISIS groups forming, talking about Kashmir, saying we gotta do something about Kashmir. So what the actual larger term effect, because like one thing to talk about online, what the actual larger term effects, like, I don't know, because there is like even more than anything else, like not some political decisions like radicalize people, but it's also like human rights violations, oppressions that also radicalize people. So like it's been almost 70 days of like without communication and under lockdown. This thing's not just like affecting like the so-called mainstream parties, it's also affecting how people view like groups like the Hizbul Mujahideen, because even some things I was reading is like people are going, this still happened and look what they're doing to us now, and you're supposedly fighting for us. So it's possible there might be a big boost, but at the very, very least, like again, too hard to say. I'm not sure if it'll come from Kashmir or somewhere else, but I think more importantly is like, I'm not too worried about the boost that will come, because ultimately any boost can be managed. It's more of what are we doing to ourselves and like what we're doing to cause it.
I have one question clarification. Hindutva is not new. Modi didn't invent it in Hindutva. If you go through the fascism in Western countries in Europe, all of them are based in Hindutva. Although many people may not know, Hitler, Mussolini, they knew very well Saffron Terror. Then what we call now jihadist reaction to Hindutva, if we're talking about India and Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, we cannot misunderstood the jihadism created by Western capitalism with the reaction of a people is being isolated, is being killed daily, is being denied their own identity. Then jihadist reaction to Hindutva, maybe we need to clarify a little, because one thing are the jihadist movements born in Afghanistan, for example, and we know are created by the USA and the money and mercenaries coming from Canada and USA, no Muslim people. And another thing is the protest, the reaction of a people is being killed daily for the last 70 years. 70 years, denying their identity, the right to be, the right to choose who they want to be. We need to differentiate a little, no?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, what is happening now in Kashmir,
so,
we cannot call jihadism. It's a reaction of a people is being oppressed for the last 70 years, denying them the right to be who they are, no?
So, on the Kashmir thing, okay, again, with the Hindutva, there's a much longer history. I try to give you a capsule version of what their beliefs are and some things. Of course, it goes back much farther than that. Two, okay, what happened to Kashmir? Like, it's not like you said, it's not a reaction to Hindutva. There's like what happened to Kashmir is a political problem. And like you said, like they have been oppressed. There's been like a virtual military occupation in practice, if not by law. And if you guys have read there's been massacres, there's been numerous human rights violations. So when we're talking about the reaction, of course, I'm not reacting to that. And again, I'm not dealing with any like local Kashmiri groups or whatever because like there's a lot of social activists who are fighting against the Indian state and that for their rights. Again, I'm focusing on what these two groups are saying, and I purposely want to stay away from Kashmir because the narrative on Kashmir is very different from the narrative on Hindutva. And again, like I'm presenting like a very thin slice because there's a much longer history, and like even before, like when you're talking about riots, I mean, before Hindutva even had power, the Hindutvalis were still involved in riots. Before Hindutva, there was still like depression in Kashmir, there's like the military operations in Assam, there's still like everything that's happening in the Naxalites area. So again, like this is a very thin slice. And I don't want like viewing everything from like a jihad point of view. I just did it for this paper to like understand their narrative better. But understanding problems from like an extremist point of view isn't helpful because you need to understand like what's the underlying causes, and like say oppression is a very big cause in a lot of these cases.
Hi.
Hi.
I have two questions. The first one is Hindu extremism or Islamic extremism more dangerous to India? And second is, what do you think of India's induction into the Organization for Islamic Cooperation countries?
Two very different questions. Okay, cool. So I mean, in general, like extremism is always should be a warrior of people. But the biggest worry for me, like whether it be any type of like extremism, is how you react to it. Because especially so as a non-white person growing up in 9/11 America, it wasn't exactly the easiest time, and especially considering like how like the policies the U.S. did afterwards caused even more problems than the attack would have caused otherwise. So when they say like they're both Islamic extremism is a problem. I mean Hindu extremism is a problem because at least like right now if Islamic extremists go conduct attacks, I would hope the state apparatuses would do something to either stop it or arrest the people or investigate it. Versus, I do see a problem when like people who are doing lynchings are getting off, are not either being arrested or like when the first person was arrested, they tested the meat to see if it was beef and they didn't arrest the people first. I think like that's of a bigger problem of like when we're letting our own rule of law slip, like letting rule of law slip. As for the OIC, and you becoming an OIC member, yeah, it's a very different question. I guess it would be a good thing, just being involved in international forums, but that's a different topic I don't usually focus on.
I just wanted to ask you about, do you find some pattern between these two, different organizations and also the way that they mobilize people, organize themselves? And talking about the funding part of it, you have always been the support of the regimes to fund them.
Yeah.
So, and they might, use them for their own political purposes. So that is also possible with the two organizations.
Yeah.
And do you think that the consolidation of the Hindus are also happening because of the Hindutva in India?
So there's like a lot of similarities because like, especially say with Hindutva and extremist Hindutva and extremist Islamicism, they're both social movements, and in a lot of ways they're very, very similar. So I made the joke like if you took some of the more extremist Islamists from Egypt, you replace some words, replace some of the Islamic terminology with Hindu terminology, you would have Hindutva. And it's kind of funny but sad at the same time because they're very similar because like fundamentally like there's like also fundamentally it's a question like their way to mobilize people is on the basis of identity, and like saying like this is the identity that we're holding most important. Whether they're good members of the identity is a completely different thing, but that's just how they view their identity. So when you talk, though, like there are some differences because like so India has never been like quite the war zone that Iraq or Syria was, but like say in Syria it became like infamous that like the Assad government in an attempt to like hurt the opposition would release certain prisoners who had ties with extremist groups so they can go kill the Syrian moderates. Or even in India, like with the Shiv Sena, the Congress party had a very big party. Indira Gandhi's government had a big rise in like how the Shiv Sena became major political parties. So there's like always this thing of like people trying to make alliances or like divide people, and then you have these people who are identitarian nihilists rising up from that and running out of control in a way. That answers it.
You talked about two of them being very similar in the reasons for coming out. I have a different view in that it's that one has come up in a dictatorship, in an area of dictatorship, while the other was born in a democracy. And before that, it was only before independence that when Hindutva was formed. But after that, it was democracy, and Hindutva continued in a democracy. So there is a difference between the two in why they were, why it was developed further for both.
So, I mean, you're right. Yeah, they're right. They operated in different circumstances. There are similarities between the movements, but we can also get deeper into the differences. So, for instance, within like Egypt and all these countries, they didn't have to work for identity of they didn't have to tell someone what a Muslim was, because people already had the idea of that. One of the big things of the RSS and a lot of groups is they try and tell you what a Hindu actually is. Like they actually change like the meaning of Hindu to be a race, because in their mind they need to consolidate the Hindu identity in order to consolidate the Hindu people. So I mean, there are like nuances from where they rise up. Like both came from like a colonial time period. One emerged in a democracy, one emerges in a dictatorship, and they had to deal with that. That said, there are like plenty of places where you can compare and contrast them, I feel.
But one has a base in a democracy.
Yeah.
I mean, Hindutva has a base
Yeah.
in a democracy today.
Yeah.
ISIS doesn't have a base.
So yeah, I mean, there's like that, and like you can't. At least like again, Hindutva is like a much wider phenomenon where like there's like it works as both like as like an extremist group, it works as a social movement, it works as a political party, and like you have to understand the nuances, because like they weren't like ISIS. They're not going to exactly like get guns and take over city by city and declare like a Hindu Rashtra there, and like in that way, like in some ways, the way they organize, the way they mobilize is similar to some Islamist movements, like say in Syria, Iraq, or other places. And like in that sense, like that's a much better comparison in my mind. That again, similar origins, similarities, but like they had to deal with different circumstances still, and especially understanding like how they were able to develop a base in these like democratic. Because again, like how they develop a base is a very different thing from like how Hindutva did it versus how ISIS did it, and it gets into other problems like of understanding like how did Hindutva spread. Because like again, Hindutva didn't happen in 2014. It was like here for the longest time. And sometimes it was supported by a state, like where certain governments would like appease them or give them support. But there's also a much deeper reason where I feel like we haven't really dealt with that satisfactory way.
So, yeah, I have a question.
Hi.
Yeah, for the past 1 year, I hardly hear about ISIS compared to before that. Can you say that West has essentially stopped ISIS, or it's media thing? What exactly is happening?
So it's a Trump thing. He thinks he has single-handedly defeated ISIS. If you didn't see his tweets, he has defeated ISIS, he has solved everything, blah, blah, blah. You know, because he's the great all-powerful orange man. So, I mean, the thing is, when people focus on ISIS, they're focusing on Syria and Iraq. ISIS was a very small. ISIS got a lot of attention, but there's a larger story going on in Syria and Iraq. In Syria, it was a very, very brutal civil war. Like even today, if you compared how many people ISIS killed in their so-called caliphate, that's minuscule compared to how Assad killed people, how Russians kill people, things. And even like American airstrikes, there's a very good story in the New York Times of how many thousands of people perished in Iraq because of American airstrikes. But the thing is, like, ISIS got really, really small. Like they don't have a territory anymore. But you know, before ISIS was ISIS, they were Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They were not controlling territory. They were just like throwing bombs and stuff like that. The reason why Trump doesn't want to talk about it because I defeated it. I said I defeated it. It's done, and now I want to pull it. But sadly, that's how he is, and I want to pull out. And even like right now, what people are pointing out in these countries is going like the political, like again, like all these groups are a result of political conditions, and they're a manifestation of that. The political conditions that allowed ISIS to rise in these territories still exist. There's still instability, there's still oppression, there's still corruption, there's still like no real mainstream alternatives to represent them or alternative methods for people to use. So even right now, like in the last week of Iraq, there's been some major protests against corruption, and the government has been mowing them down, and like they cut off internet so we can't find out what happened. While we know that there are snipers on the roof sniping people. So like the same political problems are there. And the people who are trying to like use peaceful methods to do it are being repressed. And these same territories where ISIS gained a foothold are not actually secure. And in fact, right now, US is pulling out of Syria, the parts of Syria, so Turkey can come in instead. So the reason why we haven't heard about it last year, because a lot of people just got bored of the story. Because the fight against ISIS is fascinating, and they all ran to the mountains. Now they're hiding in the mountains. No, not that many people care about like, oh, here's people protesting against corruption. Here's like this deal happening. That's why in the last year we haven't heard much about ISIS. It's not that they've been defeated; they're recovering, and like the conditions that they exploited in the first place are still in these places. Yeah.
I have one or two observations.
Yeah.
The first thing is that how will you categorize the Hindu Wahini group, which was formed by the Indian State and was sent to the Bangladesh prior to Bangladesh?
What was the name of the group?
Hindu Wahini.
Wahini.
And the second, which Indian State also made the Ikhwanul Muslimun, who went to Kashmir and kind of fought alongside with the. That's the one thing. The second is that I would like to little bit explain to this consolidation of this word Hindu and its kind of implications of this Hindutva word which we are repeatedly using, because I find it little bit problematic, and I'll come to that point why I find it problematic. But I also find your word jihadist word also problematic, because they are probably two uncompatible anthropological kind of entities which could be sort of put in one line together, because both have a different connotations and both have a different relevance also. And the third thing is that if we go a little bit back into the history, and I'm developing on the Aisha Jalal's argument, who quotes the Maulana Anwar Shah Kashmiri and said when the British took over India, and there was a very important fatwa which Maulana Anwar Shah Kashmiri gave, and that fatwa was hey, look, we are not in power, and we probably are not capable to fight also, but in that case the Muslim muftis would advise to migrate. But Maulana Anwar Shah Kashmiri came, we are not in power, fine, and we can't fight because we are not capable of fighting, but Muslims still can stay back. So you are building up on a reaction of Islamic reaction, but I think Maulana Anwar Shah Kashmiri's reaction is kind of been ignored, on which the Muslims have kind of stayed back in India. I hope you understand what I mean.
So hold on to the mic. I want to ask you to remind me of the questions. So your first question is whether do I consider the Ikhwan and Kashmir extremists and the Hindu Wahini, the one in Uttar Pradesh? Yeah, I consider them extremists. Yeah, simple as that. Like I mean, especially in Kashmir, you've seen like what the Ikhwan and Muslimin done. Like they committed horrific human rights abuses. They were non-state actors who went and committed violence. So for me, if you're committing violence in the name of a political cause, for me that's and I know you could say again this can get into a larger question of how do we define extremism, because there's the right of resistance, and I'm coming from a more pacifist background, but I think in the case of there's when I'll say clarify my things of saying say there's a difference between say attacking civilians, where I feel if you're taking your violence out on civilians, that's where I have a problem with it. Not as collateral damage, but if they're the main target, which in the case of the Hindu Wahini and the Ikhwan Muslimin, they were primarily, of course they may attack some other people, but they were attacking a lot of civilians or causing harm to civilians. So that's where I personally draw the line of extremism. If you're taking it out on civilians, that's a problem. Can you remind me of the second question?
I was finding this a bit problematic.
Oh, the jihadists.
Because I find there are two terms they probably cannot come into the. They are not in par with each other. They are uncomparables, which can't be basically fixed in the same thing because they have a different connotations altogether. So one word is a political kind, gives a political kind of a connotation. Another is more of a theological, embedded in the theology of the practice of a particular discipline, right? So there are completely two different terms in that way. So
I agree with that. I'll just point out one in the literature, but even especially around places in the Middle East, the word jihad is used. Of course, the word jihad has a very different connotation depending on the person, because there's usually they call it the small jihad versus the big jihad. The big jihad, which is striving and stuff like that, and then there's the small jihad, which is fighting. And I agree, there's it's a complicated term to use, and usually depending on the audience I use it.
My point was, can there be any alternative word for that instead of this?
So there are debates what other words to use. So some people use the word takfiri, but then there's also groups like, so Hamas declares what they're doing is jihad, and whatever your opinions on Hamas, they're not a Takfiri group. They're very different. So usually, in like a lot of the literature on like the topic of Islamic extremism, jihad is used as a much broader thing. And again, the problem is like I'm talking in an environment where it is a very politicized environment versus even like while academia has its problems, and I have my own critiques of academia and the Orientalism there, it's a very different thing for me to talk about this with academics or even with other people. So even like some of the people I was talking to this paper who are from the Middle East, like Muslims in the Middle East, like they agree with the word jihadist, but they know like, well, this is the connotation of the word jihad in popular culture. But again, like the word jihadist itself is just I know like it's like has the origins of the word, and that's like a very different thing that needs to be clarified. But I'm trying to use it as more of a neutral term as a description of specifically these fighters from like espousing us from like these regions or who claim to take value from this faith. Ben, I think you also on that same question you had something about Hindutva. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, Hindutva is like a very broad term, and like one of the things like, especially when I was doing research for a project, so within like, you know, I can differentiate pretty well from like in definitions if I would go into the academic literature between mainstream Islamism, jihadism, Salafi-Jihadism, and whatever, like there's 20 different terms, they all describe a different thing. And right now in the literature, it's like they describe as like Hindutva, and the problem is like, is only use Hindutva, there's no way to differentiate it. So I try to use the word extremist Hindutva as just like a differentiation, because I have my own problems with Hindutva. I'm not like a fan of the movement, but I do think like, yeah, say in the Indian context, there's like a very different thing in Hindutva, because Hindutva is seen as a valid political force, which has to be dealt with. I'm not sure if I dealt with your second question well.
For example, when you put the Hafiz Saeed's photograph,
yeah.
Which photograph you will put along with them, and a contemporary Hindu, of course, for example.
Hopefully Muhammad what?
If you are putting him, for example,
yeah.
You know, I would like to, from your research, what could be the personality who would kind of represent that? Hindutva, of course, and you will put him along with
there's Yogi Adityanath. Okay, so.
Even in the first slide, it was only jihadists.
Well, yeah, the first time was only jihadist because I was describing the thing. I also had a slide to Hindutva, so I'm trying to understand. The point he's making. Because.
Sorry, I got distracted.
Wait, what?
Sorry, I got distracted.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand because, like you said, who I put up. There's like Swami Asimandan you could put up for Hindutva because he was cleared by courts, but he did it. There's a what's her name? Sadhvi Pragya also like we could put those people up. As far as I'm concerned, like they partake. I guess since I'm in India, I'd say allegedly partook in extremist attacks. But if you want to put them up and have a Saeed be my guest, like I just did it because the reason why I did it because you guys all know who the Sadhvi is, right? How many people knew about this? When you hear the term Islamist, did you guys ever think Ennahda party or people like democratic parties? And so usually when I put those up, going there's a spectrum. Hindutva, there's Sadhvi, there's Savarkar, there's Golwalkar. If that makes sense. And you had the third question.
Yeah, hi. Islamic extremism and Hindu extremism, they like both come from one thing. They have one thing in common, and that's religion. So do you think religion promotes the idea of extremism?
No, I mean, it's a very complicated thing. So like, so this is like, if you guys heard the author Reza Aslan, who's the author on this, put it best. If you want to find peace in something, you can go read it and you can find peace. If you want to find violence, if you want to justify your own violence, you can read something and justify violence. Religion isn't inherently promoting in my mind, like, religion doesn't inherently promote violence or peace. It's really up to what you take out of it. So for instance, like one of the most peaceful people, Abdul Ghaffar Khan, also known as Frontier Gandhi, he was a very religious man who took inspiration from Quran. And this is like during a time, and like especially when people are saying like, well, Islam promotes violence, going, there's a lot of activists who take inspiration to bring positive change. And even in the Middle East, like with the people who are protesting against corruption, protesting them, a lot of them took inspiration from religion to do it because they want to see justice. And the same thing in Hinduism. Like, I can like easily look at the Bhagavad Gita going, oh, the Bhagavad Gita is very, very violent. Like, this is me about like declaring, in the book, Krishna like ends it with like, you know, you gotta kill freely, kill without guilt. I can either interpret that as a personal thing, but I also can interpret that as like, I need to kill the injustice in the world. I need to fight against that. And in fact, there's like, at least on Hinduism, because I just read this recently and it's been sticking with me, there's a book called the Hindu Theology of Liberation, where he goes in Hinduism. So like, here's like the Hindu texts, which I believe are to strive for justice. You should fight. And this is what you should take out of it. And similarly, especially around the Middle East, where they have faced very oppressive conditions, they use religion as an inspiration for. This is why we need to fight for justice, democracy, and free speech. So I don't think religion is inherently violent or non-violent. It's really about the individual who approaches it.
It's not really a question, but I think one of the things which has been raised by many people here is what's the difference between Hindutva and Islamism. I personally believe that in the case of Hindutva, it is, one of the main reasons why it arose was because people needed some sort of shared narrative of victimhood. You know, saying that, we were oppressed and things like that. And there's a far more recent phenomenon because in a new India, which had the largest refugee population in the world back in 1947, and you had political leaders who were very intelligent but were completely out of touch with what the common people were going through. A few opportunists probably found that it was probably the best time to kind of bring this thing up. And it is probably one of the most powerful forms of identity politics. So I think that's a key difference between Hindutva and Islamism, because Islamism is still based on a literal interpretation of the scriptures. But in the case of Hindutva, it is more like a it's more like a narrative of victimhood, which is kind of brought out.
So Islamism is not based on like a literal reading of scripture. So if you read Sayyid Qutb Milestones. And this, like, in Milestones, he talks about the steps needed to take to establish the Islamic government. At no point does he actually cite anything from the Quran, anything from the Hadiths, because, again, like, they do feel like they need to become better Muslims and stuff like that. But their thing wasn't like really like we think everybody's doing something wrong theologically. Their perception was like we need to return to our Salafism is more of a theological movement, where they're more likely to interpret. So like Salafis do believe in like interpreting some of the stuff literally. They say literally, but really not. But with Islamicism, again, it's a very political movement. In fact, there's a lot of Muslims in the Middle East who say like, well, they would say it's not Islamic, but that's their own debates. But like a lot of the Islamist movements have been about we want to establish this is like our form of government because we want to have this is what we want represented. This is what we want represented, and we want our identity because again, like. It emerged from a similar thing of like, why were we colonized? It's because we got too back from like this perceived golden age we have. So again, even like when you read Sayyid Qutb, he doesn't actually cite Islamic scripture in it. And like even like several of these, some of the ISIS, like a lot of the ISIS stuff, like on the telegrams, many of them don't actually cite scriptures or hadiths. Every once in a while someone might, but it's primarily they're focused on the politics and it's like, this is what we need to fix this problem. So again, like it's important to view like that these are fundamentally, these are political groups, not religious movements.
So, in the partition of India into India and Pakistan, more than 20 million people were killed, both Hindu and Muslim. This is the number of people which were killed, which is more than the number of people killed in both World War I and World War II put together worldwide. And this 20 million people, both Hindu and Muslim, were killed. Hundreds of thousands of women were raped, both Hindu and Muslim. Now, after the partition of India into India and Pakistan, saying that Muslims there and Hindus here, 72 years after that, if you are having Hindu-Muslim problem in India, what is the meaning of the partition? Do you think that if at all there was a partition, that it should have been a clean partition, or there should not have been a partition at all in the first place?
Questioning the partition.
But what do you mean by clean partition?
Partition of India into India and Pakistan.
Wait, what?
No, clean partition in the sense that Muslims are one state, Hindus are one state. That's what it is.
No, because I mean, like, one is, So one, like, okay, I don't believe in creating nations out of like for one religious group or another, because like we're all.
You don't believe so, but it has happened.
I mean, no. If you ask me what my personal ideal of a state is, I don't believe in creating separate nation states, because I believe in like we all. Again, I believe in like living together. But also when you're saying, like, oh, like there's still a Hindu-Muslim problem. When most Hindus,
What is the meaning of the partition if you are having a Hindu-Muslim problem now in India? Mm-hmm. What is the meaning of the partition? Should there have been a partition at all in the first place? And if at all there was a partition, should it have been a clean partition?
So
or should not there have been a partition at all in the first place?
So I mean, just basically, you can't have a clean partition of India and Pakistan. Like it wasn't just. It's not like you can just magically take 200 million Muslims in India, taking them all to Pakistan. Just one is not feasible. Two, like, so Hyderabad has a lot of Muslims. Are we going to expect, if you want to do a clean partition, they're somehow going to relocate all the way to Pakistan? It just doesn't make sense fundamentally. You just
then
can't.
Why was the partition done in the first place?
It's not a question of today. No, we are not talking
People
about
are being killed in the name of Hindu and Muslim today.
True, sir. We all regret that.
So, and people were getting, okay, people, if you want to, let's see, this is completely out of battery. So, I mean, yeah, Hindu Muslims are being killed today, and like if there wasn't, so if there, let's say there's a complete magical clean partition, Hindus on one side, every single Muslim from every single place, including the states from Kerala, where none of them speak Urdu, somehow ended up there, like, is there going to be no Hindu-Muslim violence? If you like get rid of everybody in society, what's going to happen next? Like, a lot of people, like, look at the violence in Pakistan. It's not primarily directed at Hindus. It's directed at like other different groups in Pakistan, like Ahmadis, Shias, etc. And in India, like, there's like several insurgencies, whether it be in the northeast and Assam, primarily a lot of Hindus, against the Naxalites, which include Hindus, and stuff like that. There's always going to be these conflicts, and some people are going to say like, oh, we're going to do Hindu-Muslim conflict, but also at the same time, like, the Shiv Sena was committing violence against South Indians. We can't do a clean break of North India versus South India. The fear of violence, like, even and in independent and pre-independent India, there's Hindu-Muslim violence. Like, there's violence in society that's just going to happen, and there's ways to move past that. And there's like a lot of politics that feed into the violence, but why it still happens today is a much larger question. And I don't think questioning whether partition should have happened, not happened, or was a clean partition is the best way to think of it, because there's other things that's happening now that we have to look at instead.
Actually, Hindutva,
Yeah.
सावरकर है ना, हिंदी में बात कर रहा हूँ मैं। पूरा किधर उत्तर भारत देश है ना, उधर ज़्यादा मॉब लिंचिंग होंगे और मुसलमानों को होंगे, मुसलमानों को और क्रिश्चियंस को भी, दलितों को भी क्या मारम पीट हो रहे उधर, मारे फिर एक्चुअली पूरा मिडिल ईस्ट बोल के आप बता रहे ना, मिडिल ईस्ट बोल के बता रहे, फिर एक्चुअली मिडिल ईस्ट में अल कायदा ISIS वो स्टार्ट नहीं हुई, से पहले ही क्या सावरकर थ्योरी है ना, वो थ्योरी क्या आहिस्ता आहिस्ता इंजेक्ट किया गया, अब वो बड़ा होके क्या ज़्यादा पूरा भारत को नहीं बोलता मैं, क्यों बोलते, ओनली उत्तर भारत में ही ये हो रहा, दक्षिण भारत में नहीं हो रहा। इसलिए मैं क्या बोल रहा बोलते पहले एक्चुअली कौन सा भी होते आप ओनली अब इस्लामिज्म एंड हिंदुत्व बोल के लगाए ना, ओनली इस्लामिज्म को ही बता रहे तुम, मगर हिंदुत्व को तो नहीं बता रहे। RSRS 2002 में क्या गोधरा इंसिडेंट आपको मालूम ही होगा, मालूम कि नहीं मालूम, मेरे नहीं मालूम, मगर तो बहुत लोग मुसलमान मर गए। एक्चुअली वन रिलीजन को
Yeah, so by and large what he's trying to tell is that the propagation of Hindutva is leading to lynching and atrocities on the minorities and on Dalits as well. So he's just trying to say that in your presentation he did not come across more content on the RSS part, there was much on the Islamist Jihadist.
Yeah, that's fair. And like I said, as I said at the beginning, this is the first part of a larger project. So this is the first part of a larger project, because my next part is to like look at more of what the words of Hindutvadis are saying about this stuff. So this again is the first thing, and you're right about there's not just like Muslims being lynched, there's also Dalits being lynched, there's also this stuff, and like And like, there's a whole discussion to have around that because like that is, and like I have written previous articles talking about this, which if you go to my website, I guess it was posted. You'll find some of the articles talking about like how like Hindutva approaches Dalits and how like affects other minorities. The reason, again, this was based on a very specific paper of a larger project about like how these different groups view each other, and this is just one snippet of that, and this is like part of a beginning process of another thing. So of course, like this is focused on the narratives of like groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Also, groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda don't care about Dalits. I mean, that's unfortunate because they don't care about Dalits or Christians because they have their own perspective. And on this thing, I was specifically saying this is what they're saying on the group.
So, according to your research, what do you think steps could be taken to eradicate these groups? So, we know they exist, we know they are here, and India stands for an example of democracy, unity. So, what do you think steps we all can take, a common people or Indians can take to eradicate them? This is the most important issue I think we should discuss. Thank you.
So, no, great question. So the common steps, because the one thing they, again, like, especially when you talk about these groups, the narrative is they want conflict between people. So like I mean, it sounds really cheesy, but actual unity and like saying like, emphasizing going like, you know, whether you're Hindu, Muslim, like going, it doesn't matter that we're all in, I mean, I hate to get into like the Hindustani hate, but like if we're all Indian, like that's a really important part because like also like when you have like these communal acts, like condemn them, but also like simply put like implement like it's rule of law, like you should be holding these people accountable who do lynching and stuff like that. And like also like support like civil society is a very important thing, and the reason why extremist groups in general have had like Islamic extremist groups have had such a hard time in India is because like India has been a democracy. So I mean, for many parts of India, it is a democracy. They can have a say in how things are run. They can like hold people accountable. So the most important, like honestly, the most important thing is that there is like, and like again, I know it sounds cheesy, and I'm not trying to be like, oh, we should all be happy, kumbaya type thing, because I'm not really for that. But that, you know, like actually like lead by example. They're bringing up these groups, bringing up these incidents, support each other when they have these incidents, like put a stop to it, condemn it, like destroy their narrative, because they have a different narrative they're going to try to do. But ultimately, the biggest thing that weakens them is by example itself, because their entire thing is like, you need us, we're an alternative. And they're like, well, no, we don't need your alternative, this is good. It sounds cheesy, but that's like something common people can do.
I want to just state one thing.
Yeah.
In response to what he said about...
Okay.
I will, in very short, what he was telling that we should have clean demarcation of nations. Yeah. I think we should learn about history and how our national freedom happened and then comment something on that. If we trace back our freedom struggle, Hindu-Muslim unity right from after 1857 up till 1920s, Hindu-Muslim fought against the British colonial rule together. And they fought completely together, and it was the British who started dividing in religious lines. And then when we see the formation of religious groups and then it is shaped up, very less percentage of population was willing for partition. Most of the population was willing for a combined nation, and because of it was not a willful decision of the political ruling class. It became inevitable that time that partition has to happen. The condition was like that. So before saying something that it should have been like that, and the people who were creating communal divide that time, one party to that was the Hindutva forces, and they are the ones who are creating the communal divide even today.
So, divide and rule as a strategy is also reflected in communal divide. That has been the usual strategy of anybody who wants
I think we will go to people who have raised the...
Sir, do you think fundamentalism is unworkable when there is a lot of commerce and trade?
So yeah, like this, there's a lot of people who always argue that while there's like a commerce and trade, like economic growth, extremism won't happen. I personally don't believe that, because like again, like it's not just like one factor. Like if we solve this one factor, it evolves. Or even like say even with some of these people, why they join, there's a very complex reason why they join. Like so many people who join extremist groups, like say, are actually relatively wealthy, are actually relatively educated, but there's like a much deeper problem with that. Like I think commerce and trade and all that economic growth is good and is needed, and like as a country should be doing it regardless of what it does for extremism. But as that as like a one thing, as like that as a silver bullet solution, no, I don't believe in that.
I would like to differ.
Yeah.
The people who join such movements are not the ones who are rich. It is the people who start such movements who are again using divide and rule, who actually lead such institutions because they got nothing else in their mind other than selfishness to actually dictate their activities. The people who actually join these movements are those who are actually deprived of any life. They're deprived of basically subsistence. You look at what's happening in Afghanistan, you look at what's happening in Serbia, you look at what's happening in Syria, Iraq, all these places. The people who actually become the cannon fodder are the ones who don't have a choice. Only the people who lead are the ones who have got a vested interest in the entire story. And if you take it back to the global scenario today, again, America leads terrorism for the simple reason they seem to have too much wealth on hand and they don't know how to deploy it effectively. When main issues like healthcare and education are being left aside and you're creating wars as well as feeding the entire corporate machines, so it becomes the imperative. So all these guys are cannon fodder. That's about it.
So let me again disagree with that because again, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq are very unique places. They're in a state of civil war. But like, okay, even again, bring up Al Qaeda, the 9/11 hijackers were middle class people. The people from Kerala who joined ISIS were also middle class people. Economic deprivation on its own does not do it. So when we look at but even like LET, like if you like, there's been studies on people who've done it, like coming from middle class families. The poor, like when they say like economically poor, the economically poor are focused on themselves and focused on their families. They don't have like the luxury of just going somewhere to do something or fly off to some other country. When you're looking at Afghanistan, that's a very unique situation because it's in a state of civil war. Syria. So, but again, like because when we're tying like it's a one-time thing. So like even with say the Mohammed Atta, who was the lead hijacker of 9/11, Egyptian, from middle class family, educated, he felt deprived because he could not get a job, but he wasn't poor because he had family support, but he felt humiliated by that. There's many different causes. Like again, when you talk about so when saying it's just purely based on how much money they have, I try to step away from that because it's like much more complicated thing. Because like also like dignity, like in places in Syria, like they wanted dignity, they wanted to have like a future for themselves. It's not just like, and like people, it's not just like simply economic deprivation that does it. It's like a wider array of factors from like, and I would say like a wider thing of governance from like, are jobs accessible to people, or if I get a job, is it going to go to someone connected to the government instead of me? Or in this and that. So again, it's a much more complex, and that's why when I was saying is commerce and trade going to help? It can help in some cases, but again, the problem of extremism is a multifaceted problem, and you can't limit it to one thing.
Just two brief additions / responses to the comments I heard here. Hari, you can feel free to respond, agree or disagree. So your questions are about whether partition happened. Let it be stated that partition is usually, in its early stages, it's always considered a project of Allama Iqbal, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the 1940 Lahore Resolution, or even Sir Syed Ahmad with the Aligarh movement and the theory of distance, which many consider a precursor to the two-nation theory. However, there's no debate that Savarkar was for the two-nation theory. But then what's debatable, and I don't know how true or untrue this is, the two-nation theory was a project of Savarkar. So as you were saying, what's the point of partition if there's Hindu and Muslim? Partition was created so that there would be Hindu and Muslim. Let me just put it that way. And that's why Hindutva ki dukaan chal rahi. Anyway, and I think you and that lady, you guys made some interesting distinctions about the origins and finer nuanced differences between Hindutva extremist organizations and Islamist extremist organizations. I'm going to add something. Hindutva extremism. Let me say one thing. At least in its early stages or its early iterations, it didn't have CIA support. Let me just put that out there. The thing is, Soviet Al-Qaeda, maybe a lot of people say, I know you don't really necessarily agree that people like US directly created Al-Qaeda or they're directly nurturing them, but they laid the foundations for them to flourish. by leaving, by their sudden withdrawal of Afghanistan, the weapons that they left in the hands of the Mujahideen. Al-Qaeda was just a byproduct of that. Same with ISIS. After they're the ones who gave the, support and money to groups like Al-Nusra, which then somehow branched out into ISIS. I don't know if branched out is the right word.
No, it's not.
But they came for that. But
Within
the
the
thing
local
is,
governance, you'll automatically create an opportunity for all these guys to
So,
exit.
yeah,
Basically.
yeah,
Go back to
yeah, so, yeah.
Iraq is the same story, the Kurds is the same story.
Yeah, so I just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
I've read your long essay on the Hudson website.
Yeah.
And it has many problems.
Okay.
You've given one citation from the Clarion project.
Yeah.
That is.
Yeah, I know that's a.
That is a part of the inner core of the Islamophobia industry. Clarion
Yeah.
project. Apart from that, you've also given reference of Jessica Stern. She's an expert on terrorism.
Jessica
Stern. Yes, I've read that.
Jesse Darston?
Sorry?
Jessica
Stern.
Oh, Jessica Stern. Okay, yeah.
Jessica Stern. And I would like to ask you that there have been many intellectuals and scholars who have been commenting on these currents, fundamentalism, politics of fundamentalism, etc. I want to know, what have you read from other scholars like Robert Pape and Mark Sageman and Tariq Ali? Because they have been writing about this since the 1980s.
Yeah.
And can you tell us what have you learned from them?
Yeah. So, for a reason why, if you look at the citation for a Clarion project, it's specifically to the Dalbec magazine because they have the access to it. In order for me to get access to it, I have to go on to, let's just say, a lot of sketchy places that might not let me write the article. Well, let me just say I'll probably be taken away before I write the article. So that's why I cited them, because I know they're Islamophobic, and I try my best to look for other places to cite it so I can pull it from them, because I don't like supporting them. As for Jessica Stern, so, I mean, she is an older terrorism scholar. I specifically cited her because she discussed the gray zone, and that's the article she talked about. So Robert Pape is a very interesting person. So for you guys who don't know, Robert Pape wrote one of the seminal essays on suicide bombing, and his thing was it's not as ideological as people think. It's actually a reaction, because it's a result. He puts it as a result of occupation, and that's why, because at the time he wrote the article, and I think it's still true today. I need to double check the numbers. The people who committed the most amount of suicide bombings and the most lethal suicide bombings and the most advanced suicide bombings were the Tamil Tigers. In fact, I think even today, no group was as sophisticated as the Black Tigers and the Tamil Tigers. I have some more criticism of Robert Pape's work from a statistical point of view, methodology, but another good person I would actually recommend is a person named Mohammed Hafiz. And he wrote, it's a book called, because he's looking at Islamic extremism and it's why Muslims rebel, and it comes down to the problem of oppression, of how oppression creates these political conditions for extremism to thrive. So actually, before Mark Sageman, because he's written some interesting stuff, and so has Robert Pape, I would actually say Mohammed Hafiz has been a big inspiration for me of the role of oppression and creating these conditions.
And Tariq Ali?
Tariq Ali? It's been a while since I read him, so I'm not going to comment because it's been a bit of a while, so I don't want to do.
One comment. He had written a book titled The Clash of Fundamentalism.
Yeah.
Back in 2003. Crusades, Jihads, and Modernity. And before that, he had also written on how America or the CIA or NATO, they had actively funded Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Ronald Reagan had a meeting with Taliban leaders in White House in 1985.
So, quick correction on that. Those weren't Taliban. The Taliban did not exist till 1994. Those are Mujahideen, and the reason why I bring this up, because especially, so me and Dan are doing a project on the Afghans right now. For a lot of Afghans, the Mujahideen is we were fighting back against an invasion, but now against Soviets invaded, and we were fighting against an invasion. And yes, the CIA gave us arms. There's a lot of problems with the CIA. I know it's out of battery, so the CIA gave us arms, but this was our thing. We weren't the Taliban. Taliban didn't exist in 1994. In fact, many of those warlords that Reagan was with were enemies of the Taliban, and those people were so bad. That's why the Taliban was able to come in the first place, because I'm gonna name one of the people were getting in gunfights to kidnap little kids on the streets, and that's when the Taliban said we'll fix this. So, but again, a very important distinction. Al-Qaeda, Taliban, the conditions for their creation came from the Afghan war. but the Mujahideen need to be separated from that because they were like an indigenous response to an invasion. And that's just a really important point I want to clarify on that. We have two more questions.
Sir, so far we have focused only on extreme Hinduism and Islamism. But within the religion also, there was huge conflicts. Like in Hinduism in the earlier days, there was conflict between Shaivism and Vaishnavism. And nowadays in Islamism within itself, there was Sunnis against Shias, Ahmadis who are being persecuted. So is there a problem in interpretation of the religion? Because the successful interpreters are the main cause for this. Because basically no religion preaches violence against someone.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it's like you could say it's a problem of interpretation. Because like, I mean, there's definitely like, so with Islamic extremism, the amount of fatwas that have been issued out by seminaries, by theologians, by scholars, saying why your interpretation was wrong or why you're getting this wrong. It's like, there's like a joke, because especially in America, there's like this joke that whenever this Islamic extremist attack happens, the far right in America says, why aren't Muslims condemning it? So someone created an app of, here's every single attack Muslims have condemned, and it was like a 1,200-page spreadsheet of Muslims condemning terrorist attacks, and some of these are actual like long theological, I'm forgetting the word. They're destroying the argument theologically of why we're doing it. And even like within Hinduism, because like Hinduism is like a very differently structured religion, but like when you talk about this, when you talk about, there's like a bigger problem. It's not like necessarily interpretation, because like, yeah, people interpret it badly, but there's also like a very, very political thing. So when you talk about, like, say, bringing up sectarianism, in Iraq, Saddam was from the Sunnis, but he also favored the Sunnis because also like you brought up this divide and rule is how people hold on to power, and autocrats hold on to power, and autocrats need divide and rule. So like a lot of, like say in the Middle East and other places, the way what do you divide and rule on? So it's, well, you divide here Sunnis and Shias. So and this was feeding into that. So when he was removed, like the Shias who were like oppressed under Saddam were very, very angry at Sunnis, and that's how it does it. So there wasn't even a theological dispute for them, because like even if you went back like that time, like there was like a discussion saying, you know what, like I think before U.S. invasion, up to 1/3 of marriages was between Sunnis and Shias. There's like interreligious marriages, but especially with Saddam's policies to help drive people apart, and also even like with the U.S. invasion where the way they allocated government power was based on religious thing. It caused like a political conflict between groups. So like again, religion, I'm not saying it's inherently violent or peaceful. You get out of what you want to see, because like again, like these books were written centuries ago, usually in a language and a prose that people do not read today. And some of these are metaphors, some of these are not. It's a very complicated thing. Like scholars spend their entire lives trying to like parse out the meaning of like a single verse from the Quran or like a single thing from the Upanishads or this and that. It's a very, very complicated thing. But again, like when you talk about like the violences within religion, there's a lot of politics involved too.
So I've heard you talk about a lot of things. For example, the Western world is responsible for that, and economics and communalism. But then you seem to kind of discount the role of religion in all of this, right?
Say again?
You seem to kind of discount the role of religion into this, because I hear some people saying, that obviously religion is peaceful and its interpretation is what matters. But then do you not think that religion is one, at least it's not the cause, but it's one of the major causes of the unrest that we see in India, Pakistan, and other places?
Yeah, so I'll agree with that. Again, more than it's not that cause, but like specifically when their question is does religion teach you violence? It's not, like I said, it's not a straightforward answer. So like when they ask me the question, like, is religion the problem? I'm going, no, that's not a problem. Like, so if you combine, like, say, the instability in Iraq. So one thing, like a lot of people understand, like when there's instability, like you get into a very tribal mode. You're about protecting your family, and you're going to turn to other people who will like you to protect your family, because that's just pure survival instinct. And it just helps like when you can use religion to justify that. So of course some people are going to like, this is the last question by the way, but so of course people are going to use religion, but again, like using religion as like a main explanation, or even like, I find like the thing is like going, okay, like if religion was really a cause of extremism, there's 7 billion people in the world, maybe 5 billion of them are are religious. If religion was like for me, like when people say religion is violence, was it the main? Does religion cause violence or teach violence? If it was, the world would be much more violent than it is today. So that's why I say, I mean, I'm not discounting the role of religion, because like, listen, religion plays a role in like forming ideology, but before we talk, just loading up mics, okay. So before we talk about religion, because like, again, for me, like religion forms part of the ideology, but the ideology doesn't cause the extremism. You need the people who are extremists first, and that deals with a lot of political things, a lot of historical things, a lot of social things, a lot of cultural things, which religion can feed into that, but it's not it's not like the main explanation. I wouldn't even put it as the main cause of that, if that makes sense.
So that, sir, we can take it offline. Absolutely, you're most welcome. Thank you so much, Hari Prasad, for this wonderful talk, and also followed by the Q&A session. We thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being very active participants. And we look forward to your company. So please keep checking our website for the future events. Thank you so much, and good night.